What are LaMelo Ball's chances to make an All-Star game? We know the fan voting. The fans want him in. Do the media members and do the players want LaMelo Ball in? We'll talk about all of that today on Locked On Hornets.
You are Locked On Hornets, your daily Charlotte Hornets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast, and that includes YouTube. If you're watching us on YouTube, well, you can see Doug Branson. You could also see a Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. He also hosts Locked On NBA on YouTube and anywhere you get your pods. Hayes and Matt Moore. They're on the show. Doug is the real star. He steals the show as the host. So still follow Locked On NBA for Hayes and Matt Moore and give them some love as well. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Also follow me on Twitter at Walker Mail. You think LaMelo's going to get in the All-Star game, Doug? The fans sure want him to get in there.
I think it's going to be interesting for sure. He is atop the fan vote by a significant margin over Donovan Mitchell. I think you can go ahead and put Donovan Mitchell down as a starter in ink. We will get the revealing of the starters on Thursday on a TNT special. And I think it's going to come down to the players. I mean, I think the media, everything that I've read, they are ready to sink LaMelo's vote. But I don't think they can single-handedly do it because the fans have 50% and the media has 25%, and then the players have 25%. I think the players are going to not sink LaMelo's vote. They've done other players poorly before. I don't think it's like players that are notorious for just getting on the nerves of other teams, like Trae Young. Like players have notoriously done this to other players before, but I don't think they're going to do that to LaMelo Ball. I think generally people respect how LaMelo Ball approaches the game, and they're going to have none of these sort of, I don't know what you would call how the media reacts to LaMelo, but they just there's no getting off the narrative that LaMelo Ball is a winning player, even though that means nothing other than like he's on a team that doesn't win, but that's not necessarily his fault. Anyway, we've had this discussion a million times, but the media is just not going to come off that narrative, and I'm not sure, Walker, that these past 5 games where the Hornets are 4-1. And LaMelo has done a lot less shooting and a lot more passing. I'm not sure people are paying that micro close enough attention to the Hornets for that to make a difference in the media vote.
Well, and I'm sure you could even flip it now. Oh, LaMelo's points per game, they're trending downward. The 3-point efficiency, that's all that really matters here. It's trending downward. So they're just going to use that. Here's the deal. You mentioned it a little bit, but the NBA All-Star starters are going to be officially unveiled on January 23rd. That's tomorrow. That's Thursday, depending on whenever you're listening to this podcast. Right now, LaMelo leads all Eastern Conference guards in fan voting. He has almost 2 million votes. He has 1.9 million. Donovan Mitchell is up next at 1.5 million. Damian Lillard is 3. Jalen Brunson 4. Trae Young 5. Tyrese Maxey 6. Cade Cunningham 7. I went to 7 because I think Cade Cunningham is an interesting name in all of this, because I do feel like media members are excited about what Cade is showing. It's been a while, right? He's been injured. We've been waiting for Detroit to uplift themselves in the Eastern Conference playoff race. Finally, this is the year where it seems to be all coming together, at least somewhat, for the Detroit Pistons, and Cade Cunningham is the head of the snake over there. So what's interesting is, will LaMelo, despite the lead in Eastern Conference fan voting for amongst the guards, does he still get in? Robbie Calland wrote an interesting article about this on Uprocks that you can find. He said the backcourt features one particular fascinating case. It's LaMelo, who is tops in fan voting, but is not an absolute lock to make the All-Star roster. So, here we are voting him as a starter if you're just putting in Eastern Conference guards, and we are not sure if he's even going to be on the roster at this point. You're right. It comes down to the media voting him in. It's also coming down to the players possibly voting him in. I feel like players don't vote a Rudy Gobert in, right? Where they just don't understand, and I don't want to say that, they just don't agree with Rudy Gobert being this all-world defender every single year because the advanced metrics pointed out. They're like, wait, Rudy Gobert? No, I'm picking him last. They
don't like Rudy Gobert.
That's true as well. That's true. But I'm picking Rudy Gobert last if we're doing this playground style. I'm not going to vote Rudy in over some of these other NBA stars that are scoring more so, but the advanced metrics don't point towards him being a defensive god. No, Rudy Gobert, please, what are you doing? I don't think LaMelo gets on the nerves, as you mentioned, like a Trae Young does. So if it comes down to media has more than shown they're not really going to put LaMelo up on the roster like that. Like, I actually feel pretty comfortable saying media members aren't going to vote him in, but I'm with you. I think the players are probably going to salvage the day here. I would say, I understand if you have like this big quarrel with LaMelo not getting in as a starter. Fine. Okay, fine. But to deny him a spot on the All-Star roster, like, he's been good enough to make the freaking roster. To have this visceral reaction to not have him as a starter, okay, fine. This is a fan experience. This is supposed to be a showcase of talent. What are we doing if we're just going to destroy the fan voting anyway? Like, it's not like we're getting Zaza Pachulia in the top 5 of big men, right? This is not a Zaza vote. This is LaMelo, who's played like an all-star, receiving all-star votes. Even if you don't believe he's a top 2 guard in the East this year, he's a top 4 or 5 guard in the East this year. So I do wonder the visceral reaction, like, it doesn't mean that he shouldn't be on the roster altogether, which might just happen, depending on how the players vote.
Well, yeah, because if he doesn't get in as a starter, then it's down to coaches, and they're sort of notoriously fun police. So, I have questions about whether the coaches would make LaMelo Ball a reserve, despite, again, gaudy numbers, nearly 30 points a game. His assist numbers are great this season. His rebounding has ticked up. Like, he's doing everything better than he has done in previous seasons. It's just that the record for the Charlotte Hornets is improving. They're 4-1 in their last 5. It is improving, but maybe not fast enough to impact some of the narratives that are going on. I do wonder if there are injuries, if Adam Silver would wisely step in and say, hey, we should have one of the more exciting offensive players. Maybe we should put that guy into a product that we're trying to hype up. And that's the thing, too. I wonder if, like, LaMelo, I thought, embraced the All-Star game the last time he was in it. Like, he was active. He did things. In contrast to when Kemba Walker made his first All-Star game, he sort of took a back seat, was very quiet in that first All-Star performance. LaMelo just really embraced the whole thing and put a few highlights on the board. And I just wonder if Adam Silver looks at that and says, okay, why don't we have a guy that would embrace the whole idea of the All-Star, which is to put on a show. And yet I think LaMelo would also compete too. They want some competition in here. I have a really hard time with people watching LaMelo Ball and saying that this guy doesn't compete. Like, it's just that doesn't compute for me. So then I just fall back on they must not be watching, and they just remember all of the stuff of him and his brothers on whatever live stream that they were on or whatever television
Ball in
show
the Family and that LiAngelo with his hit now, which seems to be fading, and now there's
an interesting question. What happens first? Does LaMelo Ball make an All-Star game, or does LiAngelo Ball get a Grammy? Which of those things? Well, or maybe the more interesting question: LaMelo, does he win a playoff series before LiAngelo Ball wins a Grammy? I'm not sure.
So Calland writes about this scenario just real quickly. Jalen Brunson. This is the words of Calland on Up Rocks. Jalen Brunson is, I would guess, going to finish second in media voting. There are some talking themselves into Cunningham for that spot, but ultimately I think it'll be Brunson. He's also well respected around the league. I think he has a good shot to be second in player voting. A year ago he finished third. However, even if he's second in both, Brunson that is, finishing fourth in fan voting, which is the tiebreaker, would mean his average would make him the third guard. That means LaMelo could finish third in player voting, seventh in media voting, and tie Brunson with fan voting, giving him that second spot. So Jalen Brunson is an interesting name in this in terms of possibly keeping him out, because if Brunson can pick off that third spot in fan voting, a second place finish in one and no lower than a third place finish in the others would give him a floor of 2.75. That would make Ball's path much trickier. Like it's really going to be interesting, I guess, where Jalen Brunson is with what I guess Calland expects to happen. So Cunningham too. I think Brunson, Cunningham are the names to kind of watch.
I just we don't have these conversations about Victor Wembanyama, right? I mean, he takes shots, he takes 3-point shots that are you can't argue that they're bad shots. And obviously he has like gaudy block numbers. He's going to probably win Defensive Player of the Year.
I think the defensive stuff probably saves him. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, but like at the same time, but here's my point. San Antonio has not a terrible defense, but it's not a top defense in the league. He's a top defensive player. They don't have a top defense in the league. LaMelo has gaudy offensive numbers. The Hornets are terrible at offense, and their record's bad. And San Antonio has a better record this season, but they're not like an elite Western Conference team. I'm just saying we don't have the same conversations because Victor Wembanyama came into the league anointed as the phenom, the guy who was sort of next on the the MVP list, and LaMelo Ball did not come in with that. And so we're having different conversations about LaMelo Ball.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to a point sometimes where it's unfair, and I really blame I, like most fans, just blame Michael Jordan and the previous regime for all of this, for not putting a winning team around him soon enough where some of these things could be dispelled.
MJ's fault, baby. When in doubt, press the MJ button. All right, coming up next on Locked On Hornets.
Speed's everywhere!
What's the latest with the NBA trade deadline? An interesting trade between Phoenix and Utah. How do we make that local? We'll try to figure that out coming up next. LOH. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time? I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy, any of those events. One of my favorite memories was attending a concert last year. I'm really excited about the Kendrick Lamar concert this year. The energy, the excitement, it was unforgettable. Now Game Time has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Game Time Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets anymore. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, Locked On NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time?
Game time.
More Locked On Hornets ahead. The latest with the NBA trade deadline. It is fast approaching. We still have some time, though. So usually we see the deals moving in on NBA trade deadline day. Deadlines breed urgency. Does feel like a few teams are doing their homework early, though. Some teams are not procrastinating. I would say the Hornets are not procrastinating. They are out here making sure that they are getting some stuff done before they get to the deadline. They did this last year, right? This is how they operated under Schlotkin. They actually made a couple of trades before they got to deadline day. We'll see if they do something similar to that. I did want to just touch on this Phoenix-Utah trade. I think it's really interesting, Doug. So Shams Charania reported yesterday that the Phoenix Suns traded their 2031 unprotected first rounder to Utah for 3 protected first round picks. So the trade triples the Suns' allotted first round draft capital. And of course, Phoenix is expected to use those first round picks and go after Jimmy Butler. If they don't get Jimmy, then at least they have enough first round picks to go after the next disgruntled star. Just to give you some details, the Suns acquired the least favorable first round pick in 2025 of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Minnesota Timberwolves, or the Jazz, which is protected, in 2027 of Cleveland, Minnesota, or Utah, and in 2029 of Cleveland, Minnesota, and that's protected, or Utah. So again, you're getting 3 worst first round picks if you're Phoenix, and Utah is getting a 2031 unprotected first, because Utah is banking on Phoenix just imploding with no first round picks anyway. Now that they have 3, they still expect them to get rid of those to go after old Jimmy Butler, to play alongside old Kevin Durant, to play alongside Devin Booker, who might be one of the next disgruntled stars we're talking about, who is asking for his way out of Phoenix. At that point, maybe you can salvage some first-round picks, but they'll be in rebuild. And then one of those first-rounders, the 2031, would go to Utah. Very Danny Ainge. You guys get the idea. What do you make of this trade?
Oh, boy, now you got me scared. Devin Booker to Charlotte in a few years, and then I'm really going to be upset. What do I make of this? Ainge at it again. It's probably a good bet. It could backfire, though, because that pick, Ishbia, the owner of the Suns, is pretty adamant that he'll spend whatever it takes. So even though those guys that you mentioned, Durant and Jimmy Butler, they will age out, I think the Suns will continue to compete for star players around the league. And the message is out. If they do make the deal for Butler, the message is out. Like, come to Phoenix and we will write you a check. I mean, that's why Jimmy doesn't want to go to Phoenix just for the sunshine. He wants to go because he's been promised in the back rooms of the NBA that he's going to get a paycheck. So I think that they'll continue to compete for old superstars, or veteran superstars, if you want to put it that way. On the Hornets angle of this, I think the reporting that I've seen is that Milwaukee's going to get involved in this because there's all kinds of problems. The reason they need the picks is because people need to be compensated for what's about to happen. Somebody's got to take Beal. Miami does not want to take Beal. Milwaukee seems like they will take Beal because they want to get rid of Chris Middleton. Well, that means somebody's got to take Chris Middleton. And all these teams that have to take a guy are going to want some compensation in the form of these, like what will ultimately be late first-round picks. And so as players start to move around, this imminent deal seems to be a 4 or maybe even 5-team deal. We've already seen Charlotte get involved in a 6-team deal, a record-setting number of teams, 6-team deal that ended up with Klay Thompson going to Dallas. And so the Hornets got some freebie second-round picks out of that whole affair, and I think the Hornets could once again find their way into this multi-level deal just to acquire some more assets, maybe take on some bad money. They haven't been afraid to do that so far, and they've got this Okogie piece as well that could be moved. So it's going to get very interesting as we approach February 6th.
Yeah, I mean, so one, that's one way. You're right. Does Jeff Peterson get involved in all of these deals because they're calling him the team that right now is not hell-bent on winning, that could take on some bad money, that would like to have some assets, even if it's just a couple of second-round picks. We know Jeff Peterson, just like Mitch Kupchak, he is hoarding all of the second-round picks. So, hey, we need to offload some stuff. We need to make sure the money matches. Hey, somebody call Jeff. You got Jeff on speed dial? He's our guy. He's the wheel greaser.
Call that second-round guy.
Yeah, call the second-round guy. He's down in Charlotte. Make sure we phone him in. I will say, too, what this reminds me of is just, when the Hornets were in a scenario a couple of years ago where they absolutely wanted to go get Donovan Mitchell. That was a thing. The Hornets wanted to be in the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes. It was their do something thing, right? And they eventually didn't land him, but it was one of the things that they wanted to go after. They didn't have the assets. I think that's why I always look back at that trade up to go get Kai Jones. We always look to, the trade up to Kai. Even if it was so protected, people loved it. I've always said, yeah, that's great. But now that it's so protected, it means that you can't use this in trades. And that hurt them in the Donovan Mitchell sweepstakes. Like, I'm not saying Donovan would have signed off on going to Charlotte if Utah cared about where they sent him or if they just wanted the best package in return. But they didn't have the 4 firsts to trade like New York, like Cleveland. So anyways, I just wonder, with Mitch then, it's like, all right, well, my hands are tied. I don't have enough assets to compete. Where Matt Ishbia and the Phoenix Suns, they're telling you, nah, make it enough. It is Friday, Smokey's mom. Make it enough. I do feel like we have a GM that thinks that way. I think that we have a GM that would get creative enough to just get the freaking deal done. So I'm not sure how that would work, right? I know that there are pick swaps involved. I know the Hornets don't have the swaps. I'm not even saying that the Hornets are in the right position to make that work right now. But if Jeff Peterson was GM of this team a couple of years ago, he was interested in Donovan Mitchell. Is he the type of guy that would look to explore this type of trade where you just parlay one of your first into 3 lesser first or 2 lesser first, whatever, so you have enough horses to compete? I feel like now we have a GM that explores all avenues in the trade market to improve his team. And we've already seen that on full display. We've seen ownership explore all avenues. Schlotkin was driving the bus at the trade deadline last year. Mitch Kupchak told you in one of his all too honest press conferences. So, with ownership and Jeff Peterson.
We don't have any All-Stars on this team.
Right. And there's a reason for that, right? So I just feel, I look at one of these trades and I feel comforted with the fact that I think we have a GM, vice president of basketball operations to be exact. I feel like we have that guy that would, be interested in these sorts of deals.
I think so too. It's all just timing, right? Because you don't want to pull that maneuver too early, and then you end up sending out assets to other teams and end up super valuable because you haven't been able to pull all the necessary things that you need to pull together to actually compete and make sure that your pick ends up in the 20 to 30 zone and not the 5 to 20 zone. So that's one thing. I think Phoenix advantage is what I just said, is that they have an owner in Matt Ishbia who is super wealthy and willing to get out the checkbook and go into the tax. We haven't seen whether or not Schlotkin they're ready to pull that together and pay the necessary. They're not fines, but you're paying tax, on putting out a lot of salary. So we have to see that. And the other way you do this is to do what Cleveland did, which is essentially we're going to trade for Donovan. We don't know if we can keep Donovan, but we're going to take that risk. We're going to convince him that this is a great move. Toronto tried that with Kawhi, couldn't quite do it with Kawhi, but they end up with a championship out of it. So you essentially have to, take a player hostage and hope for the best. Again, it's all about risk, something that the Hornets have not previously been willing to do. And the question is, when will they take that risk? Because look, the Hornets could plod along and continue to draft and plod along for years and not make any maneuvers, and they won't compete. But they can do that, or they can take some risk and try to go after this thing. I wish I could tell you I knew exactly what they wanted to do. I just think we're going to find that out over the next couple of off seasons.
All right, coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Bees everywhere!
Hornets play the Grizzlies coming up next. We'll talk about that game in the last segment of Locked On Hornets. I guess one last thing on the trade market stuff, with Cam Johnson's name being floated out there as much as anyone, would that be a bet? The Hornets, doesn't feel like they're quite at the right spot to go after Cam Johnson and get rid of a couple of second-round picks, but you could talk yourself into it pretty easily to bring over Cam to match salary. You can clearly do that with the contracts that you have on the books. They are asking for multiple first-rounders. It seems like they're asking for 2. I don't know what the negotiation process would look like there, but would you be willing to part with a couple of first, since you've already collected a couple of first in last year's offseason, to go get Cam and just be earlier than what most people would expect and have the inside track on keeping Cam Johnson along for the ride in whatever level you take? This would be the first real big acquisition player-wise that Jeff Peterson and this team have gone through. Is that something worth exploring? Is that something that you would eventually pull the trigger on?
I mean, I would love for them to do that because I think he's such a great fit, and you won't find a lot of teams where Cam Johnson can't fit. But I think he's a great fit even if they plan on keeping Miles Bridges. It doesn't preclude them from holding on to Miles Bridges next season and seeing what happens. You can play a lineup of LaMelo, Brandon, Cam, Bridges, Mark Williams. I mean, I think that's if you can keep that core together, that's a pretty solid starting lineup. I don't know that it's, super playoff competitive, but if you can keep everyone healthy and then build a little depth, I think you can be a sneaky team. And look, the Nets have done, they've had their fair share of injuries, and also they've traded a lot of their good players, and they've managed to be a pretty good team. And Cam Johnson's been a big part of that. He almost won them surprise game against New York last night. He was just off on his what would have been a go-ahead shot. So, yeah, man, I love Cam. I think it
I
would
do
be
too.
great.
I mean,
I think it
yeah,
probably
it's tough.
would, like, buy whatever, buy some NBA analysis. I'm sure it would get killed by Pelton on the trade grades on ESPN because it would look like a move where you're ahead. I don't know that I'd love it for 2 second-rounders, but if you get down to the deadline and nobody else is offering that, and you can get in there for like one and then maybe like a heavily protected first-round pick, so you're giving two, but you're assuring yourself that if you don't make the playoffs, it's going to be okay. Like, okay. Well,
What about
I'm
it?
a little
Yeah,
more,
so
I'm a little more attracted to that.
you can play around here. You really can, because you have some younger players. Like, so then the question becomes a first and Tijon, a first and like, I don't know. I'm Mark Williams.
The problem with the Tijon thing is I would like the
Mark.
Charlotte Hornets I would actually prefer them be the team that goes out and gets someone else's young player that they're not ready, like the timeline doesn't match. Because, I mean, that's what the Thunder did. Man, they went out and got Shea, and Shea became an MVP candidate, and because that didn't match what LA was trying to do at the time. LA wanted to compete immediately. They wanted to put their big three together, and they gave up on Shea. At this point in time, I would much rather the Hornets be that team than the team giving up on Tijon Salon.
I mean, look, I think it was more so it was more so Clippers going after Paul George and to land Kawhi and Paul, and it was like, okay, throw SGA in among the plethora of first that we're getting, because the Clippers they didn't want to get rid of.
Well, it'd be great if the Hornets could do both, but they don't have a Paul George,
right? So I think the scenario you're talking about is, hey, can we get? Because remember, Shea's rookie year was awesome. Like it's like. LaMelo is the guy going out in that scenario. That it's not even Brandon, right? It's LaMelo.
It might get crazy. You never know. Can you imagine?
Cam is the interesting name that like you could bridge timelines together, even if it feels a little too early. You could absolutely talk yourself into it with the Cam acquisition, especially Jeff Peterson having familiarity with the Nets. I think maybe that would make some sense. Grizzlies, Hornets preview. Grizzlies, good basketball team. They're 28-15 on the season. They have a 3-game winning streak. They've lost a couple of games recently, but they were both to Houston, who is one of the best teams in the Western Conference. So Memphis playing very well. What are you looking at in particular in this matchup tonight?
Yeah, Memphis is really good. They're really deep. They play like 11 guys, 14-plus minutes. You're just they can win. In fact, more often I've seen Memphis win and Ja Morant have like a solid game than I've seen them win and Ja Morant have an amazing game. So maybe there's something there. There's a wrinkle there. It's like, let's let Ja get whatever he wants and maybe put more of the focus on Jaren Jackson, who they look to close games out a lot. He can take guys off the dribble. I'm a little scared for Mark Williams. This might not be an opportunity for him to get off the schneid after what happened to Daniel Gafford. It's a tough matchup to then follow it up with. But Desmond Bane is shooting the lights out right now. He has the 91st points per shot attempt as a wing, 123.2. That's incredible. Santi Adalma, I don't know if he might be injured. I haven't checked the latest injury report.
No, he played. He played against in their last game. He played. So
okay, and then the rookies. I mean, they take Edey. I know a lot of people wanted the Hornets to look at Edey. They take Edey. He's played all right, but Jalen Wells is the guy that's shocking a lot of people and getting into the Rookie of the Year conversation. He's a big wing that also shooting the basketball pretty well, and defensively he can guard anyone. Like he's sneaky big, and he moves his feet in a way that you're like, that doesn't make any sense. So the Hornets have played better offensively, but this is going to be a difficult one. Here's the big thing for Memphis: they turn the basketball over. That has been their Achilles heel all season. They should blow teams out, and they don't. They win a lot of close games, but they should be blowing teams out, and they don't, and it's because they cough the basketball up. So Hornets, defensively, I want to see them aggressive. I want to see them in shirts. I want to see them jumping passing lanes. That worked against Dallas. When you saw that, we talked about LaMelo ball denial on Kyrie Irving, getting out, stealing the basketball, and getting into transition. That is the only way they are going to be able to hang with the Grizzlies, because if they get into a half-court game with Memphis, they will get dominated.
Yeah, the Mark Williams angle. If we talk about just the most interesting storylines the rest of the way, like Mark is A block material, no matter if he's getting bodied by Daniel Gafford or if he's flirting with 20 and 20 again, which he's done multiple games. So it's just always A block material with Mark. I think in this game, yeah, like you bring up Jaren Jackson, but I'm interested more so in the Zach Edey battle, right? Like if you're talking about Jaren Jackson stretching him out, well, he's smaller than your bigger matchups that Mark has struggled with more so against your Gaffords, even Vucevic just doing a lot of post work down low. Man, I want to see the Edey matchup. You know, if we're talking physicality, Edey isn't afraid of anyone. Edey will put an elbow straight into your chest. So how does Mark respond with some of that physicality that Edey might bring to the starting lineup? You honestly have a couple different flavors that Mark's going to be going against. And so the transition across both of those players, I think that's something I'm going to be following. What do you do against Zach? How do you play there? And then how do you play when you're up against some box out battles with Jaren Jackson down low? So Mark Williams, certainly a player to watch out for. And then can Nick Smith Jr. keep the hot streak going? This team is challenged offensively. They lost one of their best offensive players in Brandon Miller. They've been picking that up with NSJ and Miles Bridges too. But Miles, you probably feel a little safer there with the consistency. Nick Smith Jr., just where he is in his career, it's going to be a wild card, whether he can give you 15 or whether he goes 0 of 5 like he did a few games back. So NSJ, can he continue to provide a spark? And he played 30 minutes last game against Dallas. Like it's a ton of minutes for the young gun. So are you going to still get some production from him? I think that's something to watch for.
Yeah, for sure. I would say final thing is that the Hornets found their outside shot again against Dallas, and it helped propel them to a victory. I mean, it can't be any different in this game. They're going to have to shoot well. That's going to be on NSJ. That's going to be on LaMelo Ball, who finally put together a good shooting game. And then Miles Bridges, got to see continued play for him. I mean, I think the Hornets are in a situation very similar to what we've heard out of Los Angeles, the Lakers. Their margin of error is really zero, which is what LeBron said and what J.J. Redick said about that team. They really have to play perfect basketball in order to compete. The Hornets don't have an Anthony Davis. They don't have a LeBron James, but they do have to play perfect basketball. And I think they've got to play perfect team basketball, right? This is not a team where they've not shown the ability for LaMelo Ball to go for 50 and them have a great chance at winning a basketball game. This has to be, really on down the line. Josh Green and Cody Martin giving up their offense, but being available to hit 3-point shots when they're open, but giving up their offensive activity in order to go chase around John Morant and Desmond Bane and, free up LaMelo Ball to actually go and take some threes and hit some threes. So,
all right, hopefully
I think it'll be a fun game. The Hornets are a toss-up right now. They are competing in games that you wouldn't normally say they would compete with, but the level of competition, Memphis is going to be a little bit different. Even Chicago, Dallas without Luka, Utah, Phoenix. Phoenix got some talent, but they've got some problems. So the wins that the Hornets have gotten have been good wins for the Hornets, but the competition hasn't been great. This will be their first test against a team that's like, oh, okay, this team's going far in the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure. Memphis is good. Dallas is close, though. Like, I know they don't have Luka, but Kyrie and Gafford, and, I know people might roll their eyes, but PJ's been very good for them. I would say PJ is a good player. So you're talking about some talent enough where that was a fun win. Can you go another step up? Because I would agree. I think Memphis is another step up, especially with Dallas not having Luka. So can we keep climbing that mountain and be competitive? That would be fun. Hopefully we're talking about 4 in a row. Yeah, I know the Tankanistas might want to stop at some point, but at the same time, it's nice to win. It's nice to win. That'll do it for Locked On Hornets. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods. That includes YouTube, Doug Branson, everyhornetsboxscore.com, also host of Locked On NBA. I'm Walker Mail. Listen to me on WFNZ every weekday from 12 to 3 p.m. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow to recap the Hornets-Grizzlies game.